So I would like to thank, first of all, Elaine Papoulias and the staff of the Center for European Studies for the marvelous work they've done. And of course, lunch is not free, so you can imagine that there is a cost involved in organizing events of that kind. So I would like to thank our sponsors, who are Dianeosis, a think tank from Greece. They are partnering with us the second time this year. Then the Project on Europe and Transatlantic Relationship at Kennedy School Belfer Center, Real Collegio Complutense, Central European University, I say still in Budapest, the European Stability Initiative, John F. Kennedy Memorial Fellowship, and Jean Monnet ad personam chair in European Union Law and Government. Thank you very much for your support. And we are very fortunate indeed to have with us Sigmar Gabriel. And it's my great honor to introduce you. I think that, you know, the social scientists are having this debate about what's better, parliamentary democracy or presidential democracy. And I think that Mr. Gabriel is an empirical proof that parliamentary democracies are superior, because they are really able to keep experience and experienced politicians for many years in different roles in government and so on. So let me only briefly mention all the positions Sigmar Gabriel had in Germany over the last couple of decades. So he was a Vice Chancellor of Germany from 2013 to 2018. He was Federal Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2017 to 2018. He was the leader of the Social Democratic Party from 2009 to 2017. This is the longest tenure since Willy Brandt. He was the Federal Minister of Economic Affairs and Energy. Before that, he was Federal Minister of Environment, Nature Conservancy and Nuclear Safety. And then before that, Minister President of Lower Saxony from 1999 to 2003. We are extremely grateful that Mr. Gabriel has spent so much time with us at the Center for European Studies. He's been the Kennedy Memorial Policy Fellow for the last 4 weeks or so. We exploited him in a shameless way. He met our students, he met our colleagues, he met everyone involved in a CES, and we are really grateful for that, for this generosity and friendship you extended to all of us. So let me ask Mr. Gabriel to join me here and for remarks, the keynote address of that conference.
Thank you very much, Grzegorz. I don't know what's better, presidential system or parliamentarian system, but if you use me as an example, I'm an example. At the end, the party will kill you. So this is maybe in every system the same way. So thank you very much for your kind invitation. And first of all, I want to thank you and your colleagues that you put Europe in the center of your work and your academics. I mean, to be very honest, outside Harvard, outside the Center for European Studies, Europe is not in the center of the international debate and not in the center of the American debate, and sometimes for good reasons, because of our weakness. But so it's much more important, I think, to see what's maybe could be done on the American side and as well on the European and especially on the German side to improve our transatlantic relations. But since today is my last day of my bit more than 3 week stay here at CES, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you again for the invitation and for the really great hospitality that I was able to enjoy here. Those were really intense weeks, and Hans-Helmut Kotz and me, we were not only here in Harvard, we traveled also to West Virginia to meet some Trump supporters which are there. For us, it's also interesting to listen to them to understand what's happening there. And so the center offered us a broad perspective of American reality. So thanks again to everyone here at the CES, and especially to Elaine, to Gila, Laura, Vasilis, Hans-Helmut, and of course to you, Grzegorz. At the same time, I thank you for the opportunity to attend the CES at the European Summit. I listened carefully, especially to the first panel today about transatlantic cooperation. And little is moving me as much as the question of the future of Europe. Much depends on how my country, Germany, develops in the coming months. Because Germany is too big, too centrally located in Europe, and economically and politically too important to deal permanently only with itself, which, if we are honest, already much longer than just a few weeks and months. I'm convinced that if my country had reacted to the initiatives of France for a stronger Europe in a more offensive, earlier, and more committed way, the entire European populace would have had it not so easy, for example, in Italy. However, the existing frustration over the too high youth unemployment in Southern Europe, the desolation of the bureaucracy in Brussels, or the unwillingness to tackle big challenges like migration seem to be only a political offer to the nationalists and the anti-Europeans. What is missing is a strong, also emotionally motivating alternative which recalls what Europe should actually be: a joint project that allows for a better life for all and gradually adjusts the living conditions in Europe, offering better options to as many Europeans as possible, and above all protects the weakest. It obviously goes far beyond the technocratic answers to banking union or a European finance minister or a common backstop. Nobody will even understand what these phrases would mean for his daily life. It is also more than a common market. As Jacques Delors, the former president of the European Commission, rightly said, nobody falls in love with a common market. I say it in front of my good friend, the previous commissioner for competition in the European Commission. So, if you want to restore more support to Europe in our populations, we should remember that original idea. In the coming years, it will not be so much a question of more Europe in the sense of the ever closer union, but first of all of a different Europe. One that does not give the impression, as Donald Trump does, that's all about a zero-sum game where somebody is paying and others are taking. I mean, there is a very wrong narrative in my country that Germany is, it's a very old narrative since more than 30 years, so that Germany is the net payer to all these lazy guys in the south of Europe. That's the narrative which is deeply rooted in the politics and also in the population. And it's obvious that it's wrong. It's not necessary to study mathematics or to have rocket science to know that if somebody is an exporter, an exporting country, and the world champions in exporting its goods and services, maybe he would get more money out from other countries than sending money to them. So my colleagues and everybody who wants to do a better Europe, we should explain, especially to those who are a bit in distance to the European Union, that Germany will lose thousands and hundreds of thousands of jobs if Europe would be weaker. We will only have economic success if the rest of Europe is doing better than in the past. So we need a Europe in which, above all, my country is prepared to invest more in European security, in research, development, education and training, and joint competitiveness. A Europe that always puts itself first in the shoes of the weakest member of the Union, in security policy in the shoes of the Baltic and the Poles, in the financial policy in the shoes of the South, and in migration policy in the shoes of Greece and Italy. A Europe that fosters fairness and equity, and thus more life for all, by combating the legal tax avoidance of large corporations. A Europe that also works against corruption, organized crime and bad governance. We see it especially in the southwest of Europe. Not allowing member states such as Poland and Hungary to enjoy the benefits of the European Union, not least because of high inflows of funds. In Hungary, almost half of the public investment is financed by Brussels, while undermining, in the same time, the rule of law and the press freedom and the independence of the judiciary. And a Europe that does not relinquish its member states' responsibility for the success of the European project, because we are facing a phase in which it will arrive at the member states. Europe will only survive if its member states want it. The European project has one condition that it cannot itself achieve. That is the will to European unification between its member states and broad support within its populations. As long as it is an elite project, we will lose the European Union. And the readiness of its political leaders to take responsibility for the whole, to look beyond the box of national short-term interests. Only if that succeeds will the European projects regain its radiance. However, a united and stronger Europe is only a necessary and not yet sufficient condition for our self-assertion in a world in deep transformation. Alone, we will have a hard time not getting into the milestones in this world, and I very much agree what we heard in the morning, that it's impossible to split from the United States. The truth is, we cannot live with Donald Trump, and we can live without the United States. That's what we are faced with. The great antipodes of the 21st century will be the US and China, economically, but also in political and security terms. What will this new world order 3.0 look like? Economically, it is about the question of whether the world economy will have the same rules for everyone. One can hardly speak of a fair competition when almost 2 of 5 of the trade is in a manner that is contrary to the WTO rules. Separation of one's own markets through non-tariff trade barriers, high state subsidies for the own economy, systematic disregard of intellectual property rights, joint venture coercion, and increasing control by the state apparatus are the opposite of what one sees as a functioning one social market economy. The US, Europe, as well as countries like Japan, Australia, South Korea, and others, have the same interest in respect to China. The question, however, is whether we represent our interests together and create a level playing field that is binding for all countries of the world. At present, the tendency seems to be in the transatlantic relationship that everyone tries to get as much out of their own country as possible in bilateral deals, or in the European Union, where the nation states cannot pursue trade policy for the European Union. And even if we succeed in creating free and open markets with a level playing field, what remains unanswered is what we actually do in a globalized and data-driven economy to ensure that there is not only free, but also fair and social responsible trade. How do we prevent the emergence of permanent winners and permanent losers? Who actually has the benefits of globalization? How does a fair world economy come out, and not only a free world economy? Politically, we are in a competition between the liberal democracies and the authoritarian offering in the world. This too has a lot to do with economic and social success or failure. Are our liberal democracies actually capable of being more efficient, more productive, more socially secure, and more politically stable than the authoritarian regimes? Not only in Africa, where China's offerings have long been in competition with those of the West, we are losing ground rather than winning. This arises. It turns out to be bluntly straight even in our home countries. And in terms of security policy, we may be facing perhaps the greatest challenges. How do we deal with the growing conflicts in the Middle East? Which security challenges arise in the Pacific? And especially for us Europeans, how do we prevent a new nuclear arms race? The system of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, that is, the division of the world into nuclear weapon states and nuclear have-nots, which in gratitude for their reunification of nuclear weapons has been given access to the peaceful use of nuclear energy, has long become a chimera. It is not only North Korea and Iran that are considering how to make themselves invulnerable by possessing nuclear weapons in their regimes. And both major nuclear powers, the US and Russia, now have a common nuclear counterpart, China, a country that is not involved in any arms control or disarmament treaties. Rather than negotiating with the allies in Europe and perhaps even with Russia how to change that and what common strategy it could take towards China, both states are on the verge of agreeing to the contractual ties of arms control and disarmament agrees to gain more freedom to participate in nuclear arms race. So, enough to do for the discussion in the transatlantic alliance. The prerequisite of developing common strategies on all these issues seems to me to be approaching these challenges with new realism rather than too much sentimentality. The old transatlantic relationship in which Europe could focus on itself and, with the exception of the United Kingdom and France, was internally abstinent and the US had to deal with all unpleasant questions is finally over. And of course, as we heard in the morning, I understand that the United States is asking us to do more in Europe, especially in Germany, for our defense strategies. But I would say maybe it's not the best idea to invest 2% of the GDP only in the German army. I mean, it would be 80 billion euros every year in the German army. France, it's a nuclear power, they are investing 40 billion euros every year. What do you think, what will France think maybe in 10 years about what has developed in Germany? So I would say 1.5 investment in the German army and 0.5 out of Germany in NATO capabilities, especially for Eastern Europe. Then we would show that Germany is willing to accept responsibility for the public good defense, which in the past only the US did. So it would be 2% of GDP, but not in the German army, but in common capabilities in NATO or in the European Union. I would prefer NATO, because then other parts which are members of the European Union but not members of NATO, like Sweden, that could get access to that, they want to do that. So this would be my proposal for the horrible debate about these 2%. I don't want to have a big military power in the center of Europe. By the way, that was the reason why the United States started with the idea not to give Germany and Europe the whole capabilities for their defense policy. It was a political decision to took 70% of the burdens to the American shoulders, because the Americans were not so sure what Germany would do after the experiences of 2 world wars, and I think it was a good idea to do this in that way. Now time is changing, so we have to do more, and we have to do more in on the responsibility of the European capabilities, and therefore Germany should invest and show responsibility to the defense policy. By the way, I think defense is maybe one of the fields where nearly everybody could agree on in Europe. It's not the field where are so many difficulties like in others. So maybe this is more than defense. It's maybe something where we could reunite Europe in a very special way. So the US too, I think, hopefully notes that even in the world of tomorrow, alliances and allies are important in protecting one's own values and also national interests. Bowling alone is not only a very unpleasant life in private terms, but also in international terms. Not only China enters the world stage, but also in some years from now, the most populated country, India, will do so, and others will follow. So the world order will not as stable as it was. The West has to look in the future of international relations and not only in the past and in the present. From a European perspective, we should recognize that the US is going to change permanently. In just a few years, the majority of Americans will now have European roots, but Asian, Latin Americans, and African ones. This new America will also look at transatlantic relations differently. It was not Donald Trump who said for the first time that US is a Pacific nation. It was Barack Obama. Or the presidents before, they said America is a transatlantic nation. Now, for obvious reasons, they are looking more to Asia and to the Pacific. And by the way, it's not forgiven that the new Americans out of Latin America, the Hispanics, the Asians, the Africans, that they would see the transatlantic relations that like we did it, or like we did it the last 70 years, not necessarily friendly. The first generations of immigrants often have a much cooler, tougher, and above all, interest-oriented view of political realities. And they will also not look back in the past, but maybe they will agree to look in the future. In my view, it is therefore time to invest much more in a new transatlantic relationship, to define common values, but above all, also common interests, and to distribute our roles. We Germans and we Europeans should invest a lot in the America of tomorrow, and the next generation, in Hispanics, the descendants of Asians and African immigrants. And we should not just go to New York, Washington, California, and of course to Boston, but look at the cultural, political, and economic breadth of this great country far more. The Center for European Studies is a unique platform to think about these issues interdisciplinary and from different perspectives. Therefore, Grzegorz and your colleagues, I would like to thank you once again for spending time at CES with us, the Europeans, and being able to share with you in a very fruitful exchange. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, friends, thank you so much for those very important remarks and a panoramic view of the challenges and the future of relations between US and Europe. We'll have time for questions. There is a mic sitting in the middle of the room, so if you would like to ask the question, probably the best strategy would be to line up behind that mic to make things easier. But before you do that, before you have this big line over there, let me start our discussion by asking a question which will be more about Germany than about transatlantic issues. For as long as I remember, and I have to say that my memories are not very long, Germany was the source of stability in Europe. Of course, we disagreed on many things, like trade surplus or austerity policy vis-à-vis Greece and so on. But nevertheless, there was no one questioned the leadership of Germany in Europe. No one questioned the leadership of German Chancellor in Europe. Now we are seeing a big change. The major parties, the foundations of German politics are losing voters. There are new political forces emerging on the political scene. The Chancellor, kids remember forever, suddenly decided to quit. Is Germany entering the period of instability? Is that instability going to affect the European Union? and by extension, of course, the transatlantic relations.
What is the most dangerous example for politicians? Belgium. For 2 years, they do not have a government, but everything went well. So this is, if people would recognize this, then it's really dangerous for us as politicians. So, I mean, in respect to Europe, maybe Germany is much more important than, because it's centralized, it's 80 million citizens, it's the biggest economy. But what I would like to say is, we are in a period of political transition. Of course we are. I'm not sure if it's so different than it was between 1981 and 1983. I'm not so sure, because at that time we also had a government of the Social Democrats and the Liberals which were struggling, and then after a period of time they changed the government. What's new is that Germany's political atmosphere is developing in the direction of the whole society. I mean, we are much more individualistic than we had been 30, 40 years before. And now parties are following that development. I don't think that it will lead us to more instability. It will be much more difficult for political leaders to form coalition governments and stable governments. That's true. Therefore, I think we will need new form of political leaders. In the past, it was easy to get a coalition between two parties, and that's much easier than to form a coalition government between, for example, conservatives, Greens, and liberals, or between social democrats, liberals, and Greens. So the person who should organize this must be a very special one. Maybe Merkel came too early. Maybe we would need a person like her now. But I'm sure there will be somebody. I don't think, the country is in an excellent economic shape. We have the lowest unemployment rate since decades. We have, fortunately, higher wages, higher pensions. Yes, of course, we have new challenges like the migration issue. And of course, Germany is much too focused on itself in respect to Europe. But I do not think that this is political instability. It's a phase of transition. We will have a new parliament. And if you look to the last regional elections, the right-wing populists, they were not so successful that many people thought. I mean, they got in Bavaria, the polls were up to 20%, they got 11. In Hessen, the polls also up to nearly 20%, they had 13. And if you look in detail, the majority of this party, not everybody, of course they are also real fascists, but the majority of the party, they were former members and voters, especially from the Conservative Party and the Liberals. And because Merkel was, for many of them, too liberal, at the end they split up. Like we as Social Democrats had the experience that the very left wings left the party during our reform process. Now the Conservative Party is no longer able to hold these nationalists or the national part of her party inside the party. We always had this part. We always had it. It was in the party, but it got not the majority. What is new is that the old right-wing part of the Conservative Party would have a firewall to the real fascists. This is not the case today with the Alternative for Germany. They are shifting things to the right. Today, there are speeches in the German parliament. Only some years from now, you would have been thrown out of the parliament to have such speeches there. It would be impossible. And that's something new and that's something dangerous. But above all, I do not think that Germany is in a relatively unstable phase.
The floor is open, ladies and gentlemen.
I mean, I'm a social democrat, so by nature I'm an optimistic person.
Question, comments? please. If you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name is Muriel Rouillet. I'm French, and I'm a professor of political science, and I teach a course here at HKS on Global Europe. Thank you very much for your all your interventions. The fact that you're being exploited by CS is of great enjoyment for us. Thank you for your thoughts. It's not very social to do that. And my question is about social democracy in Europe. It is sometimes said that the EU is a social democrat project, at least compared to the US, with a big market balanced by social rights of sort. Do you think this is still the case? And could you tell us a bit more on the role of the left in Europe, and particularly in Germany? We often talk about Germany, but Germany is not a monolith. You mentioned parliamentary democracy, different political forces animated. We know that the left is not in a good position in Europe these days, but what could renew it? What is the left doing to renew itself? What do you think we could or should do to revive the social democrat spirit of Europe? Thank you.
Well, first of all, unfortunately, Europe is not a social democratic project. The Social Democrats and the labor movement at the beginning of the 20th century, they thought Europe would grow up from the bottom to the top as a labor movement. In 2 world wars, they had to recognize that there was no international solidarity or European solidarity among the labor parties. So Europe was, after the Second World War, a top-down project, especially led by more conservative politicians. And it was, so I only want to say it's not the real social democratic project. It became, with Willy Brandt, a more social democratic project, and then with Felipe González and many others. But at the very beginning, it was a top-down project. Secondly, I mean, Europe was, like the United States and the rest of the world, for the last 30 years, a project where people thought that competition of the common market, that's what's necessary. There were no so many social rules. For example, in a public offer in Hamburg, for example, every European member state or a company out of a European member state could ask for the public offer by their own wages, by their own labor costs. And of course, it's difficult to live in Hamburg with Portuguese wages. So people thought that's an unfair competition. And now France, as you know, they started at the beginning of the year a project which called the same wage on the same place in Europe, where we tried to get more social stability, because at the beginning of Europe's project we thought there will be a conversion. Everybody after a period of time will have nearly the same living conditions. And we saw that, I mean, what we saw today, or see today, is that the rich ones become better and the poorer ones became poorer. And that's the reason, by the way, the nationalists and the anti-European populists, they get more support. So I would say what we have to do is to find a new balance between a common market as on the one hand side and social responsibilities. And I mean, you cannot explain to a baker store in Germany that the tax rate for a baker store is higher than the tax rate for companies like Starbucks, Google, Amazon, or anything else, because we have these special regulation in parts of Europe, in the Netherlands and Ireland, or some British islands. So that's what people say, it's completely unfair. And then, of course, you can come and explain them many economical theories. They will not even listen to you, because in their daily life they see that they have to pay taxes every day, and others, they do nothing for the common goods, but using, of course, the infrastructure, the education, and many other things.
So that's, Europe has to be different than today. If there is no different story about Europe, then we will lose support. And it's not enough that politicians come together and say, we have to have a common Europe. And by the way, I also do this in that way. We often explain the necessity for Europe's unity by the developing in the rest of the world. So at the end we say, we should be united because we are afraid from the rest of the world. I don't think that Europe will be stable only by fears. I think, especially left-wing parties, they need an idea of hope, not only driven by fears. To use fears, the right-wing populists are always better. And only one sentence to the left. What is the left? What is it? I mean, I know in France and in Germany parts of the left who are really anti-Europeans, who are nationalists, and who try to convince their voters that the old times, with a lot of borders, would protect the interests of the workers better than today. And they are left, or they are right? They are national Bolshevists, or I don't know. So I would say what is left is the idea of enlightenment, to argue in the line with the idea of enlightenment and the idea of, was heißt emanzipatorisch in English? Emancipatory. I beg your pardon for my bad English. I'm out of. Okay, because I'm out of social circumstances where we're not being trained to learn foreign languages. I'm a really social democrat. No, I'm the first. And by the way, I'm proud to come out of this society. But I mean, this is the idea of the left, and I see parts of the left who are acting like the right-wing populists.
We have first a question from the Berlin table, please.
Sorry, it's too hard to get to the microphone. I'm Steve Erlanger from the New York Times. Here, Gabriel, we used to talk about die Mauer in der Kopf, the wall in the heads, east and west, and we used to think, oh, it was all coming together. But the last election has made it clear the wall seems higher than ever. You have a government now which has almost no Eastern representation. And I would like to get your sense of what's gone wrong in terms of German unification and what can be done to fix it.
A long story. I mean, in Germany we say you need a lot of dogs to kill the rabbit. And we had a lot of dogs. First, of course, we started by the idea that because eastern part of Germany was not so productive than the western part, we said, you should have lower wages than the west, then all the industry will come in to the east. And of course it doesn't happen. I'm half east because my wife comes from eastern Germany, so I'm forced to go every Sunday to the eastern Germany. And I mean, and this part of my family, I have a worker in the aluminium industry. He works, and he's a qualified worker. He works for 4 shifts, and he get out a net paying by 1,400 euros per month. He knows exactly that the same company has an industrial place in the southwest where they have collective bargaining. For the same work, people there get 2,400 euros per month. So he knows exactly what's going on there. And of course, he's not satisfied with his situation. Or 20% of the smaller villages, maybe even more, they do not have a shop, a doctor, a pharmacy, a school, not even a bus stop. They do not feel recognized through us. I think there is a sentiment in east part of Germany. It's by the way a question of identity, not to be seen by the political and economic elites. My wife, I met my wife in a bigger city of East Germany, in Halle. In the center of Halle, there are 5 big buildings. Big not in the sense of Boston, but in the sense of Halle. So, since 1990, they are all empty. Nobody's in there. The only people will come up from the fire brigade or the police sometimes. But there, nobody's inside for nearly 25 years. Then the mayor of Hamburg said, okay, we should deconstruct the place. And then they had an NGO where many people signed up, said, stop. We don't want to have a deconstruction of these 5 buildings. Everybody knows that nobody will go inside. And the argument was, you will destroy the last building of our East German history. Now the West is occupying the last 5 buildings. So people said, better to have the bad things there, because we do not know what will come next. So they have the feeling of a kind of colonization through the West. And then, as I said, I'm forced by my wife to go to East Germany for good reasons. So I every year have to go on summer to the Baltic Sea, every year. So nobody should try to invite me to other places of Europe. I would like to go to Spain, but impossible, impossible. So we went to the Baltic region. There's a region where, but during the last regional elections, they voted for 40% for the right-wing populists, 40%. It's impossible that these people are all fascists or right-wing populists. What happened? We in Germany, we have rules, and unfortunately, we follow the rules. One of the rules is how many citizens you have to have if you want to have a court, a local court. How many citizens you need to have a financial institution. How big should the birth rate be to have an offer for pregnant women in the hospital? And how many citizens you need to have an hospital? Whenever we went below, we closed the court, the financial institution, the offering in the hospital for pregnant women, and the hospital. And then the people decided what we can do that those guys in the regional capital do remember that we are here. And it's unfortunately to vote for the left-wing party, it's not very, I mean, the mayor comes out from the left-wing party, so nobody will look to you. So they voted for the right-wingers. What was the consequence? Next day, the hospital was reopened. So if the lesson is, you have to vote for the right-wingers, then something will happen, that's a very dangerous lesson. And that's the situation. And how to come out? To listen carefully to the people. I mean, maybe that's something we have in common between the US and Germany.
We finally have a line. So please.
Hi, Sabine von Mehring, Brandeis University. I was listening to you in your opening remarks and realized that you did not address an issue that is very important to me and I think should be important to all of us, and that is climate change. And as a former Minister of the Environment and as someone who has seen the results of the election the last few weeks, and as someone who I'm sure has also paid attention to the latest IPCC report, I'm a little surprised that the future outlook that you describe is, with respect to economic ideas, is very much business as usual. But if you look at the situation in Europe today, if you look at the political situation in Germany today, with the AfD now being a party in parliament that denies the reality of climate change, right? With 13% of the vote. And with Germany not meeting its commitments to the Paris Agreement. I mean, don't you think that something really dramatic needs to happen, and that if anybody, Germany can make it happen and should make it happen, with respect to reducing fossil fuel emissions.
What is dramatic?
Well, something
What do you mean
that
with
meets
what is
the
something?
needs.
What is your
Well,
idea?
for example, not being the world's largest exporter of lignite coal anymore. For example, actually taking the Kohleausstieg seriously and not being in the pockets of the industry that wants it to continue.
Fine, let's do it. And then? I mean, to be very honest, we have a debate in Germany to phase out lignite. At the same time, we phase out nuclear. And it's only a debate between should we do it up to 2033 to 2035 or 2035 and a half. I don't think that this has any impact to the world, to the climate in the world, if we do it by 2033 or 2035 or 2036. That's only the debate in Germany. Everybody agrees that we have to phase out lignite, but what is the difficulty? And that's why I think we have to do more than debating about climate change. It's very easy to say we should do whatever we can to prevent climate change as long as you ignore your economic and industrialized interests. And it's very easy to do whatever you can do for your industrial and economic interests as long as you ignore climate issues. The really challenge is to bring both sides together, because nobody will follow Germany and Europe if climate or a climate policy will lead to economic difficult situations. I mean, I've been part of many international climate conferences. It was never a negotiation about climate. It was always a negotiation about economic affairs. There were ministers for the environment, they debated without any result because the ministers for finance and economic affairs were not part of the negotiation. And for the first time, we did it the other way around, was in the Copenhagen meeting and in the Paris meeting. Then the heads of state and government intervened. So we have to do, or what is Europe's and Germany's role? To show that it's possible to have economic success and a better climate policy.
And you think it is possible?
Of course it is possible. But coming back to the question of the alternative for Germany. I mean, because I'm a politician. I'm not an academic. And so I'm a universal dilettante. But I have to convince people to support me. If not, we can discuss whatever we want. So, after the German reunification, in the part of Germany where the lignite is produced, we had 100,000 workers in the lignite industry. 100,000. We reduced it after some years to 10,000. From 100,000 to 10,000. And we always promised the people, you should not be worried. We will bring new industry and new jobs in the region. Nothing happened. Nothing. So now we have 10,000 jobs, high qualified, with high wages, excellent pension situation. Now we are coming and say, look, we will eradicate the last 10,000, but you should not be worried. We will bring new jobs in the region. What do you think what the people think about that? And this is the promise of the left wings, the conservative, the Greens, the Social Democrats, and the Liberals. The only party who says, no, we do not trust these guys in Berlin, is the Alternative for Germany, the right-wing populist. And what we saw during the last elections was that, of course, all the people voted for the right-wing populist party. So I think it's much more difficult to bring the different parts of the society to the same track. And at the end of the day, political life is concrete, not only in theory. And I would say, let's phase out nuclear, but first, let's bring new jobs in the region. Or explain to the people what the future for the young people will be in that region. And then, of course, we can go 2029 out of lignite. That's not the debate. The question is, what's our offer to the people? Go to West Virginia and ask why the people which voted for more than 80 years for the Democrats, why do they vote for the Republicans? I'm not debating about the question if Donald Trump has really the chance to get back the industry. That's not the question. But the people saw that they were all out of the coal mines, the old industry, steel, chemical industry. They always had the feeling people had to move out of West Virginia. What are they doing now? They are voting for Donald Trump. I don't want to be a person who is responsible at the end of the day for a fine theoretical climate policy, but without any support from this part of our society. Then at the end, my country would be maybe also divorced, and that's not what I think what I should do. So unfortunately, I'm very blunt and very pushy to this question, but normally I'm much more kindly than...
Catherine, please.
Okay, so I'm going to yell in this direction because I'm very close to you. Catherine Ashbrook, I lead the project on Europe and the transatlantic relationship with Nick Burns at the Kennedy School. I wanted you to do some after-lunch math with us, because if I remember at the Munich Security Conference, when you talked about the investment that Germany was going to make toward the 2% collective defense goal, there you made an argument that composite to that would be spending, of course, on development policy, conflict prevention, that would be a more palatable argument to the German voting public. Now you've just made an argument to say we're going to split the 2% up slightly differently, at least in your mind. How does that break down? Is that one of the parts of the same coin? And don't you feel that the debates that we had in Germany over the course of the summer actually demonstrated that the German voting public is far ahead of its own politicians when it comes to investing in collective security?
No, it's quite the opposite. I invite you to come to my constituency. I mean, I have 45% of my voters since 30 years. You should discuss with them. It's much better than discuss with me. Then you will know a bit more about, I mean, when I met Rex Tillerson for the first time, he also, of course, he criticized me for our attitude. And I said, look, you teach us to be peaceniks for nearly 70 years. And now we are. So it would need a bit time to explain our citizens that the world is changing. I mean, to criticize us, I would say what we did wrong was not to have a strategic debate in the public. Germany is not trained for strategic debates for good reasons. When we were able to have strategic debate, it was dangerous for the rest of the world. So we are the last vegetarians in a world full of carnivores. And of course, what we have to do is to explain to our citizens that's dangerous to be the last vegetarian. I don't want to be a carnivore again, but I want to be a flexitarian. So that would be my advice. And to coming to the first question, we have a coalition agreement. I think it's very good. And we say for every euro we would spend for defense, we would have also a euro for official development assistance and for crisis prevention. I think this is a good idea. I would say not for every, it's not enough to have military capabilities. We also have to do things in the diplomacy and crisis prevention and investing in education to get more powerful European foreign policy. It's not only by having military power projections, but without having a military power projection, nobody will listen to us. And even the rebels in Syria, by the way, not when the US withdrew, to whom they turned their faces, to the Russians, not to the Europeans. So that's the reason I would say you need both. But to say that the German citizens are far ahead from the politicians and we like and the citizens like to have more power projection. That's not the truth. There is much more dangerous development. There is an idea which makes career in Germany from the very left and the very right. I call it the fight above the German soul. The offer on the very left and the very right is Germany, and maybe Europe as well, should be like a global Switzerland. Economically potential, in political terms, abstinent. This is a very easy offer. It's on a silver tablet to all those who say, we are looking at the television, this difficult world. They should do whatever they want. I mean, we all know that this is a very dangerous idea, but you can see it on the very left wing and the very right wing. If you go to the German parliament, it's interesting to listen to the left wing members of the parliament and the right wing members of the parliament. In this question, they have the same arguments. And so I would say we have a lot to do to train our public opinion that, on the one hand side, we have to learn to have strategic debates. That's, by the way, a very difficult development if UK would leave us. That's very difficult for Europe. On the other hand side, we have to be careful because there's nobody who will look to us or be our parent. So we have to take care about ourselves. That's something we have to learn.
Since we are running out of time, let me switch the procedure, and I will ask for the questions to be asked, several, and then we'll come back to you after that, and you will be able to address some of those or pick the ones which makes you more upset. And okay, please.
Mr. Gabriel, thank you so much for your keynote address. My name's Stephanie. I study transatlantic relations at the Fletcher School. You mentioned the need to make trade more fair and inclusive. I'm just wondering if you can elaborate more on what that means to you. And in the situation that you were to succeed for Cecilia Malmström in being the EU Trade Commissioner, what policies would you pursue to achieve your vision of what inclusive trade means?
Thank you very much.
I'm Bernd Wittig from MIT. The European Union has, at the moment, two opportunities to show to the world what it's about and what it's not about, to its citizens, but also to the world. The one is Brexit, and the other one, very different, is a situation in Hungary. What is your opinion to use those situations to sharpen the identity of the European Union?
Thank you very much. We will have couple of more questions and comments. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Seth Johnston, a visiting scholar here at the Center for European Studies. Thank you for your comments. This question is also a follow-up similar to the question asked earlier by Catherine Ashbrook, and it's about your proposal regarding defense investment and security. You've concretely put forward a proposal to split the 2% into the 1.5 and the 0.5, and then you've just elaborated that you'd also like to see a variety of other inputs in terms of development assistance and diplomacy. Could I ask you to elaborate also on the outputs or the ways that you see that these things being channeled effectively? You mentioned in your remarks, for example, that you'd like to see NATO privileged over the EU. Could you elaborate on these kinds of institutional outputs as well? Thank you.
Okay, so we have two more questions.
I joined the European Parliament, and I fought a lot that my country joined the European Union because I strongly believe in the European values and in more Europe, as we call it, the United Europe Federation of Europe. However, after 10 years spent in the European Parliament, I don't believe so strongly, and this is because I realize that we have not been able, and I don't see how we'll be able to have a common political foreign policy, a common fiscal policy and also sometimes a common trade policy, because like Germany, France, Italy, other countries have different interests. We remember during Crimea, we are all shouting against the Russian Federation, and the French were selling vessels, Mistral vessels to the to the Russians. And I can also ask myself why Germany destroyed the nuclear plants, although there is no earthquake ever in Germany or a tsunami.
Unfortunately, it's not true. We built one of on the center of an earthquake. We built a nuclear power plant. It was stopped by the High Court.
And then we have South Stream gas coming from Russia to the Baltic Sea directly to Germany. On foreign policy, I really don't see how we can unite. I wish, again, I wish. But knowing what happens in the past 10 years, I don't think it's possible. Maybe the enlargement did not help to this, but enlargement was good. On the other hand, so if you can answer these doubts and make me eliminate them.
Thank you very much.
I'd like
Okay.
to say something on a more funny tone. I did swim in the Baltic Sea in November.
Please do not tell it to my wife.
I was doing sauna in the forest, and we went like 7, 8 times in the Baltic Sea in November.
Do you recommend the experience?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And the last intervention, Professor Kaiser.
You made the point that the events in Italy would be different if Germany had agreed to Macron's proposal. Now, how should Germany now cooperate with Macron?
Thank you very much.
Starting with the last question, I think there is a bit. I have a bit more optimism because what was one of the main reasons why Angela Merkel did not react more offensive to Emmanuel Macron? Maybe there are also different reasons, but one of the reasons was that she lost all her credit on the migration in her own party. So to have a more pro-European policy, which at the end means to have a higher investment in Europe, to agree to something like an unemployment common security or a European budget, it was very difficult for her to get a majority and support in her party. If you look to the program of Mr. Merz, he starts, for me, surprisingly, with a very pro-European program. Just before he published that he wants to be head of the party, he signed a common call together with Habermas and others for a stronger Europe. So maybe also there is a bit changing. That's a signal of hope. I hope that the German government will understand that this maybe is the last chance. I mean, Macron won the last presidential election, yes, but there also have been 12 million voters for Le Pen and for the right-wing populists. So we are not sure what will happen during the next presidential elections. So hopefully the German government and the German parliament will be more offensive. To the question of optimism in respect to European Union. I mean, we did well in the financial crisis. We did well. Yes, we went through. The euro did not broke up. I mean, with all the difficulties in Greece and other countries, but there is still the currency, a common currency, by the way, with a lower debt than the US dollar or the Japanese currency or the Chinese currency. we stood together in the Ukraine crisis. I mean, yes, of course, who went to Moscow and to Kiev to stop the military intervention? I mean, we were just in front of a military defeat of the Ukraine. That was the reason why the Ukraine accepted the Minsk agreement. And it was the intervention of Merkel and Hollande. They did it for the first time without the Americans. And that time the Americans debated about delivering weapons, heavy weapons, to the Ukraine to get a war against Russia. I think we prevented the war for good reasons. And I do not see only bad signals and bad symptoms. Of course it's difficult. At the end it will depend on the willingness of the governments. Yes, I'm not on the opinion that the European Parliament will be the driver of European development during the next years. You can say unfortunately not, but I would say the upcoming years will be an intergovernmental Europe, much more than it has been before. But is this so dangerous? Dangerous? No, it's not. Dangerous would be if the governments will not take responsibility for that. On Russia, I think the debate, Europe is too dependent on Russian gas, I do not agree on this. Why? Russia is dependent that we are buying gas from them. And what we should do is to invest in the gas infrastructure of Europe, to have a more interconnected gas infrastructure. So if there will be the day that Russia wants to pressure us, then we could use any other resource from other parts of the world because we have an interconnected gas infrastructure. That's what we should do. To go back in the time before the liberalization of the gas market, that cannot be in our economic interest. I mean, the United States, we had a very blunt debate from the US president who said Europe should buy gas from the United States, not from Russia, for economic interest. That's fine. He was very, very clear. But I don't want to bring my industry to buy a gas which is 30% higher in the price than the Russian gas. I want to be independent from Russia. Therefore, we should invest in the gas infrastructure, but not in one resource. I was, as a social democrat, a defender of the liberalization of the gas market. And now we have a policy where everybody wants to go back, where the countries and the states and the policies intervening in the liberalized gas market. I'm completely against. That's not in our interest. At the end of the day, we have to have a very strong economy that's much more interested than the question from where we will get our gas. But we should invest in the interconnectors of the gas market, like we did, by the way, in the electricity grid. There it's much better. We are close to a European electricity market because we invested a lot in the grids and the interconnectors. Then the question was...
There was a question on Hungary?
On Hungary. Hungary maybe is much, we discussed it yesterday, is maybe much more difficult than Poland. I mean, I would say, first of all, the Conservatives should throw out the party from Mr. Orban out of the family of the Conservative parties. Maybe the Social Democrats have to do it the same with the Romanian Social Democrats.
And the Maltese.
Maybe everybody. But we should send more to some parts. Malta is one of them. We should more police and we should do more attention about corruption, organized crime there. It's different to Hungary. It's not a question especially to organized crime. It's a question, does Orban and the majority of the citizens respect the European values? And so I would say there are some red lines with the independence of the judiciary, freedom of speech, freedom of press. If Hungary is not accepting it, then we should be very tough and then not deliver money to the country. That's maybe the only leverage we have. Then there was the question, by the way, Europe should not only debate always about values. We are world champions by debating values. It's better to debate interests as well. That would be my advice.
I think because we are out of time, and this was a very great sentence to finish the conversation, please join me to thank Mr. Gabriel for